So let's begin with the talk. So recently I was introduced to Tibetan Chenrezig Practice. This practice is traditionally available to all, so I became interested in this practice. I'm always interested in things that are accessible, and I began to research it. This talk will summarize the results of my research and conclude with a recitation of one version of the practice itself. There are, as with many Tibetan practices, multiple versions, and it will be presented in English, not in Tibetan. Not only because I don't speak Tibetan, but also because there are different views on this. Some people believe that the rituals should be recited in Tibetan. Some people believe that it's better to recite the practices in a language which the participants understand. I adhere to the latter school. You find similar debate going on in the Roman Catholic Church, of course, with respect to the Mass. There are those who argue in favor of the Latin Mass, even though they have no idea what's being said, and there are those who argue in favor of an English Mass. My view is that these are ultimately psychological practices that are supposed to engender certain psychological reactions, and with the exception of the mantras, which are intrinsically efficacious in the original language, I do feel that these practices should be presented in English, or whatever the language of the participants is, so that they are understood. I think it's quite clear from my study of the Pali Canon that the Buddha emphasized the cultivation of wisdom and therefore of understanding, as the essential principle of Dharma. First, Chenrezig, the word Chenrezig, which I'll actually put, it's on the sign outside the door, but just in case you didn't notice it, there's the spelling of it. Sometimes there are variations in the spelling. Sometimes the G at the end is a K. So Chenrezig is the Tibetan name of the Bodhisattva, more commonly known as Avalokiteshvara, which is Sanskrit, literally meaning the Lord who looks down. Avalokiteshvara embodies the compassion of all of the Buddhas, that is to say, the intrinsic compassion of universal Buddhahood itself, not associated with any particular individual. Thus, he is an aspect of universal Buddha mind or Buddha nature itself. Avalokiteshvara is represented as male or female in different traditions, including as the Chinese figure of Guan Yin and the Cambodian and Thai figure of Lokeshvara, which literally means Lord of the World. In Theravada Sri Lanka, even, he is, perhaps surprisingly to some, he is venerated as Nata. So he is truly a universal figure who transcends the ongoing debate between the so-called Hinayana and Mahayana. As many of you are aware, I am an eclectic universalist in my orientation to Buddhism. And although I am strongly influenced by the Vajrayana tradition, my primary object of study is the Pali texts. In the Tibetan tradition, the Dalai Lama is regarded as an emanation of Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara. And it's important, in my humble opinion, perhaps not so humble, but in my opinion, it's important not to get bogged down in names or culturally contingent symbols. As I've presented arguments in previous talks in favor of the view that the Buddha was not a sectarian and did not consider sectarianism to be dharmic. All of these traditions are variations of the same underlying universal constant, expressed in terms of different cultural biases and mindsets. To say that one is better or worse than another is the error of sectarianism, which is clearly prohibited by the Buddha in the Pali Canon. Avalokiteshvara is mentioned in the Lotus Sutra, and some of you may have participated in the formal reading of the Lotus Sutra, which we engaged in last summer over 9 one-hour sessions as a meritorious practice. So Avalokiteshvara is mentioned in the Lotus Sutra, the Karanda Vyuha Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the Nilakanta Dharani Sutra, the 11-faced Avalokiteshvara Heart Dharani Sutra, and the Chunda Dharani Sutra. The earliest historical reference to him appears to be in chapter 25 of the Lotus Sutra, where Avalokiteshvara is described as a compassionate bodhisattva who hears the cries of sentient beings and works tirelessly to help those who call on his name. 33 distinct forms of Avalokiteshvara are described. However, it is important to realize that all of these are secondary associations to the primary or essential meaning of Avalokiteshvara, which is simply that the name that was given to the compassion aspect of universal or primordial Buddhahood that is nothing other than the essential Buddha mind itself, present in all beings, which is emanated or manifested by all of the Buddhas and is one of the primary aspects of reality itself. This essential identity of Avalokiteshvara and Buddha mind is the highest teaching of Chenrezig practice, traditionally associated with formal transmission from a qualified teacher. I did say earlier that Chenrezig practice is open to everyone, and that is true. However, the highest teachings of Chenrezig practice, and I won't go into the details, it's a form of what's called the assumption of God forms in the Western esoteric tradition. That aspect of Chenrezig practice is traditionally does require formal transmission from a qualified teacher, but simply practicing the basic Chenrezig practice, such as we're going to do today, either by reciting it or to listening to a recitation of it, is completely open to everyone. Rather like the Kalachakra, actually, the Dalai Lama gives Kalachakra initiations to mass audiences. So those of you who are concerned about orthodoxy in the Tantric tradition need not fear that anything we're doing today is in any way unorthodox. Thus, the historicity of any particular story or tradition concerning Avalokiteshvara is a secondary consideration. Some may be historical, others may be symbolic. And we've discussed this in previous talks too, the principle that even non-historical accounts can contain real teachings, which are true, even though they may not be historically factual, hence the whole significance of symbolic teachings. Similarly, in the Pali tradition, certain devas, which is, of course, the Pali word for higher dimensional beings, often mistranslated gods or deities, certain devas do not appear to be individuals, but rather offices or roles in which a succession of devas are reborn over time, or even natural phenomena, such as the stars, sun, and moon. This is the real significance of the cult of Avalokiteshvara. From this perspective, Avalokiteshvara appears rather as the archetypal potential of ultimate spiritual compassion that may be accessed or activated in oneself by these methods, which the naive and the uninitiated imagine to be a human historical individual. This is something that one finds in all spiritual traditions. There are teachings that are presented to the majority, let's say, as historical realities, but in fact they encode symbolic teachings or truths, which are actually the essential meanings. Numerous symbols, for example, I would cite, for example, the cult of saints in the Catholic Church, which comes to mind. Numerous symbols are associated with the cult of Avalokiteshvara, and incidentally, when I use this word cult, I'm not using it in any pejorative sense. I'm using it in the strict English etymological sense of a system of devotional practice, with no pejorative, the modern journalistic meaning of the word, not using it in that sense at all. So it has no pejorative connotation whatsoever. So numerous symbols are associated with the cult of Avalokiteshvara, including male and female figures, the eye, the lotus, an 18-armed form called Chundi, a 1,000-armed form, and the famous 6-syllable auditory formula or a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. Through the synthetic practices of devotion, offering, visualization, and chanting, the mind of the devotee is entrained upon the archetype of Avalokiteshvara and access gained to the egregore. An interesting word. The egregore is a vast reservoir of psychic energy that is in turn an emanation or manifestation of the compassion aspect of Buddhahood. An egregore is a reservoir of psychic energy or power built up over centuries and millennia of continuous devotion, rather like the Pure Lands in Pure Land Buddhism, for example, which are actually produced by the devotion of the people who entrain their minds upon it. Although a term of Western origin, possibly originating in the Book of Enoch, we find something approximating the meaning of egregore in the Pali Canon, where the stars, sun, and moon are all referred to as devas, luminous beings that concentrate enormous quantities of spiritual or psychic force. And as far as I know, I'm the only one to have applied this principle of the egregore to Buddhism. However, it's such a useful concept that I feel justified in doing so today. Egregore has been associated with the concept of the meme, which also relates to the tantric concept of transmission, which in the Pali Canon takes the form of references to drumming the deathless. The meme is, of course, the essential unit of meaning in a linguistic or symbolic representation, which spreads through the population by psychic contagion, as it were. And you can read more about this online as a whole study of memes, a whole science of memes, in fact, that has been engaged in for some time now. Dr. Peter Macefield, in particular, has emphasized the importance of auditory transmission in the Pali Canon, something, again, which one tends to associate with Tantra, but as I've shown in this series of talks, for those of you who have participated in my previous talks, we should not be surprised now to discover that the root of this tantric principle in the Pali Canon. And I strongly recommend Peter Macefield's book, Divine Revelation in the Pali Canon, if you're interested in learning more about this. Shingon Buddhism employs the mantra Ong Aruri Kya Soa Ka for the same purpose. The Nilakanta Dharani has an 82-syllable mantra of Avalokiteshvara. Chenrezig Practice is clearly, and I don't know if Dar, I don't have my names on, so I don't know if Dar is in the audience, but thank you very much. If you are, thank you very much, Dar, for this insight that I'm about to present. I got this from Dar, and it's a very handy insight. Chenrezig Practice is clearly a tantric development of metta meditation, or metta meditation. Metta is the Pali word for compassion. Metta meditation is one of the most frequently referred to practices in the Pali Canon, the oldest surviving collection of Buddhist scriptures. The Pali Canon rarely describes actual practices. Rather, it summarizes practices that were presumably explained in detail in person. Clearly, therefore, the Pali Canon is not complete even within its own frame of reference. Metta is celebrated in the Metta Sutta, which one finds in the Sutta Nipata. The practice, however, is found all through the Pali Canon. Metta practices, and in fact there are people that make metta practice their lifetime practice, and there are organizations or organized around this single practice. So the practice, however, is found all through the Pali Canon, where it is called the divine abiding, the Brahma Vihara, similar in fact to the Tathagata's dwelling, which is the name given by the Buddha to meditation on the breathing, thus indicating its singular importance. The following quotation is the first reference to the Brahma Vihara in the Sutta Pitaka from Sutta 13 of the Digha Nikaya. And some of you may have participated in my series of talks on the suttas of the Digha Nikaya, which we finished this year. Took about 34, 35 weeks, and has now been published in my book, Conversations with the Buddha, where it is presented like mindfulness of the breathing as the practice of a Tathagata. And I'm going to read the quotation. It's somewhat lengthy. I'm going to try and put it in chat. I don't know if the whole quotation will appear, but there it is in case you're interested in following along, since it is a somewhat lengthy quotation. So this is the description of the metta practice from the Digha Nikaya. With his heart filled with loving kindness, he dwells suffusing one quarter, the second, the third, the fourth. Thus he dwells suffusing the whole world, upwards, downwards, across, always with a heart filled with loving kindness, abundant, unbounded, without hate or ill will. Just as a mighty trumpeter were with little difficulty to make a proclamation to the four quarters, so by this meditation, by this liberation of the heart through loving kindness, he leaves nothing untouched, nothing unaffected in the sensuous sphere. This is the way to union with Brahma. Then, with his heart filled with compassion, he dwells suffusing one quarter, the second, the third, the fourth. Thus he dwells suffusing the whole world, upwards, downwards, across, always with a heart filled with sympathetic joy, with equanimity, abundant, unbounded, without hate or ill will. Just as a mighty trumpeter were with little difficulty to make a proclamation to the four quarters, so by this meditation, by this liberation of the heart through compassion, he leaves nothing untouched, nothing unaffected in the sensuous sphere. This is the way to union with Brahma. Then, with his heart filled with sympathetic joy, he dwells suffusing one quarter, the second, the third, the fourth. Thus he dwells suffusing the whole world, upwards, downwards, across, always with a heart filled with sympathetic joy, with equanimity, abundant, unbounded, without hate or ill will. Just as a mighty trumpeter were with little difficulty to make a proclamation to the four quarters, so by this meditation, by this liberation of the heart through sympathetic joy, he leaves nothing untouched, nothing unaffected in the sensuous sphere. This is the way to union with Brahma. Then, with his heart filled with equanimity, he dwells suffusing one quarter, the second, the third, the fourth. Thus he dwells suffusing the whole world, upwards, downwards, across, always with a heart filled with sympathetic joy, with equanimity, abundant, unbounded, without hate or ill will. Just as a mighty trumpeter were with little difficulty to make a proclamation to the four quarters, so by this meditation, by this liberation of the heart through sympathetic joy, he leaves nothing untouched, nothing unaffected in the sensuous sphere. This is the way to union with Brahma. Clearly, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic, that's unquote incidentally, clearly, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, or perhaps empathy, and equanimity all refer to the same essential concept, which we might simply designate as spiritual love. In the Christian tradition, of course, this is referred to as agape. The translator, Maurice Walsh, notes that this practice is pre-Buddhist and is also called infinitude. The Pali word is apamana. This is the only reference to metta meditation in the Digha Nikaya. However, this exercise or practice is referred to frequently throughout the Pali Canon. For example, metta is referred to in the Majjhima Nikaya in 20 suttas. And I'm not going to recite the numbers of the suttas here, but if you look up this talk on my blog, located at www.palisuttas.com, where it will automatically publish at 8 o'clock Eastern Time today, you can see references to the sutta numbers in the Majjhima Nikaya where this practice is referred to. And it's referred to in later Nikayas also, but I haven't cataloged those. In the practice implied, the practitioner focuses his or her attention on the heart, the anahata chakra, and imagines the qualities of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity there, in the place where such feelings naturally arise, whence he imagines these qualities arising and radiating or extending outward in the 6 directions, until the whole sensuous world is saturated with feelings of benevolence and compassion. This is actually a valuable corrective to the attitude that some people might have towards the sensuous world, which is essentially an attitude of derision, contempt, and even hatred. the metta practice actually inculcates feelings of benevolence and compassion towards this world, which is, of course, consistent with the bodhisattva, or the vow, the bodhicitta in Mahayana. In addition to developing the qualities of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, one can see that this is also an exercise in the concentration and expansion of consciousness. One finds the archetypal practice of the 4 or 6 directions in many traditions besides Buddhism, including Judaism, especially Kabbalah, shamanism, yoga, Taoism, and even Chinese feng shui, Celtic Wicca, and the Western esoteric tradition, especially in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, amongst others. It is indeed a universal practice, and to give just one example, compare the Navajo prayer to the 6 directions, which I will also put in the chat, so you can follow along if you're interested. So I'm quoting, As I walk, the universe is walking with me. In beauty it walks before me. In beauty it walks behind me. In beauty it walks below me. In beauty it walks above me. Beauty is on every side. As I walk with beauty. Unquote. Those of you who attended my series of talks on the Digha Nikaya may recall the householder Sigalaka, who the Buddha encountered as he traveled to Rajagaha for alms round. This was in Sutta 31 of the Digha Nikaya. He was worshipping the 6 directions, following a ritual bath in a local river in honor of his deceased father. This story is an important illustration of the Buddha's attitude to ritual practices. Despite the Buddha's frequent criticism of the Brahmanic dependence on formal ritual practice, and his repeated admonition that ritual in itself is ineffective, he does not reprimand the man nor tell him not to practice this ritual, but rather he reinterprets the ritual and gives it an equivalent ethical meaning, telling Sigalaka how to perform the ritual in such a way so as to render it effective, essentially looking at it as a psychological device. Elsewhere he contends that it is not his intention to supplant anyone's religious or ritual practices. This implies that ritual itself is effective if it is understood and applied in the right way, that is, as a skillful means, as an upaya, to use the Pali word. Similarly, there are many examples where the Buddha recommends visualization and chanting. Consequently, the rejection of ritual in and of itself is simplistic. Although the highest practitioners may abandon ritual altogether, for example, practitioners of Dzogchen, for many people ritual is a psychologically effective method, but it must be understood and practiced in the right way. Even Theravadins engage in ritual practices. So today we're going to practice Chenrezig Practice, which is a practice in the Tibetan tradition. This practice is one of those tantric practices that is traditionally available to anyone who wishes to practice it, as I mentioned earlier, and in its basic form does not require transmission from an ordained or initiated teacher. There are several versions of this practice available online, including those associated with Tungton Gyalpo, Kalo Rinpoche, and Langri Tangpa Dorji Sengi. There may be others as well. Tungton Gyalpo was a Buddhist adept, yogi, physician, blacksmith, architect, and civil engineer, interestingly, of the 14th and 15th centuries. Kalo Rinpoche, of course, was a well-known Lama who died relatively recently in 1989. I believe he taught extensively in Europe. Langri Tangpa was an important Kadampa master of the 11th and 12th centuries. The Venerable Geshe Tsephel presented the version that I have chosen to recite for today's practice to the members of Osel Shenpen Ling when he conferred the four-armed Chenrezig empowerment in Missoula, Montana, interestingly, in July of 1991. And there is also a 1,000 armed version of the Chenrezig practice. All are similar. I've chosen the four-armed version mainly because of its accessibility. Like other Tibetan practices, for example, Nyundro, about which I have spoken before, I've actually given a talk on Nyundro, it consists of a collection of standard liturgical structures, some of which will be familiar to you in various sequences or orders. These include taking refuge, generating bodhicitta, visualizing Chenrezig, devotion to Chenrezig, the seven-limb practice, which consists of prostration, offerings, confession, rejoicing, requesting the teachings, formally referred to as turning the wheel of Dharma, beseeching the Buddhas to remain, and the familiar dedication of merit, which of course we use the dedication of merit. We conclude every talk with a dedication of merit. Reciting the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, realizing one's identity with Chenrezig, which is technically supposed to be associated with transmission. That is the specific aspect of the higher practice which is associated with transmission. And in the basic practice, one visualizes the deity outside oneself. And finally, the formless meditation. I don't intend to explain the practice in detail here beyond what I've already said. However, a few words about some of the terms that appear in the practice may be in order. And rather than interrupt myself constantly in the course of the practice, I'm going to summarize them here in the form of a concise glossary in the order in which they appear in the practice. So you're going to hear these words in the practice, and I'm going to explain them now so that when you do hear them, you'll have an association to their meaning. So the first word is yidam. In the preliminary refuge, we go for refuge to all of the yidams. A yidam is the Tibetan equivalent of istadeva, literally cherished divinity. You will recall from our discussion of the Pali Canon, if you've attended by other talks, that the Buddha said that he taught and also received teachings from the devas, higher dimensional energy beings, often mistranslated gods or deities. He also taught techniques for being reborn as a deva and taught practices including visualizing devas. There are also Buddhist devas. This is all canonical in terms of the Pali Canon, which is the universal foundation of all forms of Buddhism, both Hinayana and Mahayana, including Theravada. This reference identifies this practice as a form of what is typically called deity yoga in the Tibetan tradition. The next word which you're going to hear is dakini. A dakini, literally a sky goer, is a female deva of the type described in the Pali Canon as inhabiting the realm of the four great kings, next above our own earth plane. However, the word also refers to female energy in its enlightened form and has a variety of symbolic expressions, which we're not going to go into today. Dakinis may also appear in human form. For example, Yeshitsogyal, the consort of Padmasambhav. A male dakini is called a daka, so daka and dakini, which has essentially the same meaning except it's male. So it's very similar to the types of beings which we find described in the Pali Canon in connection with the realm of the four kings. Hri is the next word you're going to hear. Hri is an Indian and Tibetan syllable that is identified with the Sahasrara chakra, the highest chakra at the crown of the head. In the Pali Canon, this corresponds to the protuberance at the crown of the head of a Buddha. It is called a seed syllable because Chenrezig arises from this. So you can see here how the personification, if you like, that's not quite the right word, but the form of Chenrezig emerges is seen as an expression of a more essential archetypal principle, an energy, as it were. And it appears at the end of the Mani mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum Hri, but is frequently vocalized internally as a nasal hum rather than as an actual letter. Hence, one normally hears it recited as Om Mani Padme Hum, and the Hri is implicit. Next word is Amitabha. In the practice, Amitabha is visualized above the head of Chenrezig. He is another bodhisattva, literally infinite light, characterized by the deep realization of the fundamental emptiness of phenomena. Amitabha symbolizes the essential nature of Chenrezig. Thus, the essence of compassion is rooted in the realization of emptiness. Like Chenrezig, he may be conceptualized as an egregore rather than as an historical or metaphysical person. The Vajra Asana is referred to next in the practice. The Vajra Asana is the yoga posture or asana in which Chenrezig typically sits. Literally, it means thunderbolt or diamond posture, and it's a kneeling position sitting on the heels. Manjushri, referred to as one of the bodhisattvas who give offerings to the Buddhas, Manjushri is a bodhisattva and a yidam associated with the transcendent wisdom of Buddhahood. Ba. The practice refers to the mandala, which, as we know, symbolizes the whole world system, built on a ba, quote-unquote. This appears to refer to the third letter of the labial class of the Sanskrit alphabet. Next is the mantra, Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. This mantra concludes the mandala offering section of the Chenrezig practice. The meaning is, I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious gurus. And of course, next is Om Mani Padme Hum. The 6-syllable mantra of Chenrezig is repeated 6 times during the prayer to Chenrezig. Variations of the practice call for it to be recited as many times as possible. The literal meaning is Om, jewel, lotus flower, Hum. Preta is referred to next, and this is a fairly common word, but just in case you're not familiar with the Pali word, I thought I would include it in the list. Preta is simply the Sanskrit word for ghost, peta in Pali, which is one of the 6 classes of sentient beings, between humans and hell beings. So it has no great metaphysical significance. It's just that the practice uses the Sanskrit rather than the English word. It simply means ghost. Potala, which we also recognize as the name of the palace of the Dalai Lamas. The practice refers to the perfect realm of Chenrezig as the Potala. This refers to Mount Potalaka, which literally means brilliance, the mythical abode of Avalokiteshvara. And it's also the name of the palace of the Dalai Lamas in Lhasa. You've probably all seen pictures of the Potala. It's supposed to exist in the sea south of India, possibly referring to the real mountain, Potakai, or Potayil, situated in Ambasamudram in Tirunelveli district in Tamil Nadu in South India. And in the version of this talk, which will be appearing at 8 o'clock Eastern Time on my blog, I've included a picture of this mountain, the actual mountain. Titans. We've talked about the classes of beings in other talks, and the word Titans in this version of the practice simply refers to the Asuras, a class of being intermediate between human beings and devas, and I've discussed these in other talks. I'm not going to go into more about them here. Personally, I prefer the translation anti-gods to Titans, which I consider a little bit to be misleading. And of course, the Titans are the deities that were cast down in the war in heaven between the 2 competing categories of gods in the realm of the 33 gods. I've done a whole talk on this in the past. Dewachan. Dewachan, literally blissful land, is the Tibetan translation of Sukhavati, or the Western Paradise, or Pure Land of Amitabha. Kaya, the 3 bodies. Trikaya describe the nature of reality or Buddhahood. The 3 bodies are both ontological and Buddhological. The 2 supreme powers are the Dharmakaya, identical with the inherent truth of things, equivalent to enlightenment, and is non-finite. The Dharmakaya appears in the Pali Canon. The Sambhogakaya, referred to in the Pali Canon as the mental body, is a blissful energy form that resembles the Nirmanakaya, the apparent spatio-temporal body of matter. And finally, the 10 stages. The 10 stages, or bhumis, refer to stages of a bodhisattva's path to awakening. And there's different classifications of the 10 stages. They're associated with the perfections of a bodhisattva, the perfections of that are developed by a bodhisattva in his or her pursuit of Buddhahood. And there's also a version of the 10 stages referred to in the Avatamsaka Sutra, referring to joy, stainlessness, illumination, radiant intelligence, mastery, manifestation, transcendence, immovability, good intelligence, and the cloud of doctrine. But I suspect here what's being referred to is the perfections of a Buddha, which are essentially the moral perfections that are cultivated by a bodhisattva. So I'm just going to summarize in the local chat the structure of the practice. Just present it as a list of essential steps or stages, if you like. And we're now at the point, I think, now where we can engage in the practice in the form of a recitation, which you can follow along with, and if you want to repeat the mantras with me or participate in the visualizations, of course you can do that, but simply hearing the practice is also meritorious and a form of practice. But before we do that, I'd just like to ask if anyone has any questions about any of this presentation, anything you didn't understand that you'd like me to elaborate on or explain further. Let's not get into too elaborate discussion. We can do that afterwards. I'm going to stay afterwards, and we can have an open discussion about this. But just for now, is there any specific points that anyone would like me to clarify before we proceed to the practice proper? If you intend to type something that's going to be somewhat lengthy, just put an asterisk or something in nearby chat, and we'll wait. Otherwise, we'll proceed. I'll give you 15 seconds. Oh, okay. Bumpy Roads has something to say. Bumpy Road says, are the masters and teachers referenced in your talk found in your blog? Some of them might be. Who were you thinking of in particular? My blog's fairly extensive. It's been, I've written 4 books. Most of the material in my blog appears in my books, and I've written 4 books now. So I refer to a variety of masters and teachers in my blog. Were you thinking of anyone in particular? Offhand, I'm not sure. I don't know exactly. I think I mentioned I'd have to go through my talk, see who I referred to, and then search in my blog and see. I think I mentioned Padmasambhava. I certainly discuss him in my blog. Other than that, I would have to go through the talk again, see exactly who I've referenced, and see who I may have talked about in my blog. I'm not sure. I certainly have talked about Padmasambhava. There is a search facility in the blog as well. If you're interested in any particular name, you can type it in search, and all the blogs in which that name occurs will come up. There's literally several 100,000 words in my blog, so it's difficult for me to answer that question. Any other questions before we proceed to the practice? Okay, it seems not. So I'm just going to point out this is not my translation or anything. It's called the Meditation and Recitation of the Great Compassionate One, Four-Armed Chenrezig. And the Venerable Geshe Tsephel presented this meditation to the members of Osul Shen Penling when he conferred the Four-Armed Chenrezig Empowerment in Missoula, Montana in July of 1991. So I just want to give credit where credit is due to him. This is his version of the Chenrezig practice. It is divided into sections, which is why I've given you the breakdown, because I'm not going to read the headings. I'm simply going to read the practice itself. So let's begin. From this moment until the heart of enlightenment is reached, I and all sentient beings, as limitless as the sky, go for refuge to all the splendid, accomplished, supreme gurus. We go for refuge to all of the idams, the deities gathered in the mandala. We go for refuge to all Buddhas, the transcendent, accomplished conquerors. We go for refuge to all the supreme Dharma. We go for refuge to the noble Sangha. We go for refuge to all the Dakas, Dakinis, protectors, and defenders of the Dharma, who each have the eye of transcending awareness. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of this practice, generosity, and so forth, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. On the crown of the head of myself and all beings, on a moon, on a lotus, is a Hri. Chenrezig arises from this. He radiates bright, clear light of 5 colors. He gazes with compassionate eyes and lovely smile. He has 4 arms. The first 2 are folded in prayer. The lower 2 hold a crystal rosary and a white lotus. He is arrayed in silks and jewels. He wears an upper robe of doeskin. His head ornament is Amitabha, Buddha of boundless light. His 2 feet are in the Vajra asana. A stainless moon is his backrest. He is the essence of all those in whom we take refuge. Lord, not veiled by any fault, white in color, whose head a perfect Buddha crowns in light, gazing compassionately at all beings, to you, Chenrezig, all-seeing one, I prostrate. I take refuge in my gurus. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I take refuge in my gurus. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I take refuge in my gurus. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I prostrate before all the Buddhas who have come in the past, present, and future, to the Dharma and the highest assembly, the Sangha, bowing down with bodies as numerous as all the atoms of the world. Just as Manjushri and other bodhisattvas have made offerings to the Buddhas, so do I make offerings to the Buddhas and their protecting sons. From beginningless samsara in this and other lives, I have unwittingly committed many non-virtues or caused others to do the same. Bewildered by the confusion of my ignorance, I have rejoiced in my own and others' non-virtue. Seeing these mistakes, I declare all of this to you, protectors, from the depths of my heart. With happiness I rejoice in the ocean of virtues of developing the mind of enlightenment, wishing to bring joy to all sentient beings and working for everyone's benefit. With hands pressed together, I request the Buddhas of all directions to light the lamp of Dharma for those who are groping in the darkness of suffering. These beings blinded by ignorance have no one to guide them. O Buddhas, who might wish to pass beyond sorrow, I beseech you with hands pressed together, please live for eons without number. By the merit I have gathered from all of these acts of virtue done in this way, may all the sufferings of every being disappear. By the virtue of offering to the assembly of Buddhas, visualize before me this mandala built in Abha, resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as with the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share its effects. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Nirya Tayami. I pray to you, my Guru Chenrezig. I pray to you, my Idam Chenrezig. I pray to you, perfect noble one Chenrezig. I pray to you, Lord Protector Chenrezig. I pray to you, Lord of Love, Chenrezig. Buddha of great compassion, hold me fast in your compassion. From time without beginning, beings have wandered in samsara, undergoing unendurable suffering. They have no other protector than you. Please bless them, that they may achieve the omniscient state of Buddhahood. With the power of evil karma gathered from beginningless time, sentient beings, through the force of anger, are born as hell beings and experience the suffering of heat and cold. May they all be born in your presence, perfect deity. Om Mani Padme Hum. With the power of evil karma gathered from beginningless time, sentient beings, through the force of greed, are born in the realms of pretas and experience the suffering of hunger and thirst. May they all be reborn in your perfect realm, the Potala. Om Mani Padme Hum. With the power of evil karma gathered from beginningless time, sentient beings, through the force of stupidity, are born as animals and experience the suffering of dullness and stupidity. May they all be reborn in your presence, protector. Om Mani Padme Hum. With the power of evil karma gathered from beginningless time, sentient beings, through the force of jealousy, are born in the realm of Titans and experience the suffering of fighting and quarreling. May they all be reborn in your realm, the Potala. Om Mani Padme Hum. With the power of evil karma gathered from beginningless time, sentient beings, through the force of pride, are born in the realm of gods and experience the suffering of change and falling. May they be reborn in your realm, the Potala. Om Mani Padme Hum. May I myself, through all my existences, act in the same manner as Chenrezig. By this means, may all beings be liberated from the impure realms, and may the most perfect sound of the 6-syllable mantra spread in the 10 directions. By the power of this prayer to you, most noble and perfect one, may all beings be trained by me. Take karma and its effects into account, and practice skillful means diligently. May they take up the Dharma for the good of all. By having prayed like this one pointedly, light shining from the holy form removes all impure karma and bewilderment. The outer realm becomes the realm of bliss, Dewachan. All knowledge, sound, and appearances become inseparable from emptiness. Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Finally, let the mind remain absorbed in its own essence, without making distinctions between subject, object, and act. Everyone's body, including my own, appears in the form of the Noble One's body. All sound is the sound of his mantra. All that arises in the mind is the great expanse of wisdom. Through virtue of this practice, may I now quickly achieve the all-seeing, one's great state. And to this same state may I come to lead every being, no, not one left behind. With all the merit of these thoughts and words, may I and every being to whom I am joined, when these imperfect forms are left behind, be born miraculously in the realm of bliss, Dewachan. Crossing the 10 stages directly after birth, may emanations fill the 10 directions in service for the benefit of all. Through this virtue, may all beings gather the accumulations of merit and awareness. May they attain 2 supreme kayas which arise from merit and awareness. Bodhicitta is precious. May those who have not engendered it engender it. May those who have engendered it not destroy it. Okay, thank you very much. That completes today's presentation. 58 minutes, not bad. The floor is open to open discussion. I'm going to go into chat now as well. So we can stay here and discuss whatever people would be interested in discussing. Those of you who are new, I think I recognize some new people in the group. This is customary for us, those who have attended talks or presentations before. We generally have a social time in local chat afterwards and simply discuss whatever people are interested in discussing, either relating to the talk or not. So I'm going out of voice now. Thank you very much. We did do a dedication of merit at the end of the practice, so there's no need for a dedication of merit now. Thank you very much for attending this presentation. I will be giving another presentation at the end of March. And please be aware that this Dharma Center, Riverside Dharma Center, is supported by the participants. So there's a tip jar outside the temple, adjacent to the sign. I do thank you very much for your support, and the floor is now open to local chat. Namaskar.